Welcome everybody. This is the third webinar in 2024 of the IOI's now standard, now traditional outreach webinars, which are targeted primarily at the alumni who have graduated from the IOI training programs internationally, but also for early career ocean professionals and other ocean professionals who are interested in the topic. Through these webinars, we plan to continue reaching out with information, state-of-the-art, cutting-edge information, and to explore topics around events that are happening right now. A case in point has been the earlier webinars offered, and most especially the topic today, which I think is, first of all, extremely pertinent nowadays. It's that of deep seabed mining. But with today's speakers, with today's topic, we are considering the aspect of geopolitics, something which we are observing as becoming more and more important in this increasingly fragmented world, multipolar world. And I think in the case of deep seabed mining, it occurs to us that this is also another area which might attract interest, both geologically, geopolitically, socially, economically, and would deserve closer inspection. Our speakers today will be introduced by Cosmin Kivu, who is going to be our moderator. And without further ado, Cosmin, I give you the floor. I just have 2 pointers. One is we will be collecting questions for the speakers afterwards, and I would very much appreciate that you place your questions in the chat. We will bring them to the attention of the appropriate speaker. If you can identify the speaker your question is addressed to, that would be perfect. And although this third webinar is not over yet, I want to remind you that we will have a fourth and final webinar this year. So enjoy this webinar and prepare for the next. Cosmin, over to you.
Thank you very much, Antonella, for the introduction. As we gather here, we are at a critical junction in the future of ocean governance and deep seabed mining. There's a growing demand for metals necessary for green technologies, and this has put the deep seabed mining at the forefront of geopolitical and environmental discussions. Today, we'll explore how national interests, international regulations, and environmental sustainability intersect in this evolving space. We have an excellent lineup of experts today who will help us navigate these complex dynamics and shed light on the challenges and opportunities ahead. Before we begin, I would also like to remind you that the session will be recorded and shared, and please do feel free to post your questions in chat. As Antonella said, we really appreciate it if you mention exactly to who the question is directed, and we'll take up as many questions as we can in the Q&A session at the end. Without further ado, let's dive in the discussion today. I will now briefly introduce our first speaker, Bobby Jo Dubush, who is an ocean advocate with broad conservation law and policy experience. She is a deep seabed mining expert focused on finance, liability, and cultural concerns. She has worked on ESG and sustainability for more than a decade and brings that experience with us today and at her consultancy, Salt Horizon. Bobby Jo, you may have the floor.
Thank you, Cosmin. Thank you, Antonella. And thank you again to IOI for having me. I am very happy to be here speaking about deep seabed mining today. I'm going to give a short presentation. I'm really looking forward to hearing also the presentations of my co-presenters, who I'm also really grateful for. And most importantly, I'm really looking forward to some Q&A and some questions. It's really great to be able to engage on this issue, and I'm really honored to present to you all, and I'm really keen to hear what you have to say about this and where your questions lie. So with that, I will share my screen, and here we go. Cosmin, can you confirm you see this all right?
I'm seeing it, looking good.
All right, great. So, as you know, we're here to talk about geopolitical divide, strategic implications. I'm going to do some scene setting and just kind of walk us through, let's see, walk us through next slide. What is seabed mining? Talk about the governance structures around seabed mining. Take a hard look at the need for seabed mining and kind of leave us for our next presentations in what's the state of play? Where are we now sitting in September of 2024? So, literally beginning at the beginning, what is seabed mining? It's mining minerals from the ocean. There are 4 target metals that are really being sought by potential seabed mining proponents. Those are copper, nickel, cobalt, and manganese. And when you think about where are we going to get them, there's a map down here kind of showing the different areas in the world that are either known or expected to have these mineral deposits. Depending who you talk to, you would hear 3 target deposits or 3 target biomes. And those are polymetallic nodules, which are found on the abyssal plain. Nodules are, imagine, kind of an accretion or a blob, a hard thing the size about a fist. And they are minerals that have stuck to something small over millions of years and created this rock, which would be found. The abyssal plains are the flat parts between the continents on the floor. I mean, this audience probably knows that, but they are the only hard thing in this otherwise kind of muddy or silty bottom. Seafloor massive sulphides are hydrothermal vents, pretty much. That's, where chemosynthetic life was discovered, all of these really unique animals, and cobalt-rich crusts are seamounts, just underwater mountains, which, as many of you would be familiar with, are also important habitat and really important for fisheries and nurseries. It's really important. Sometimes I forget to say this, but it's super important. Seabed mining is not happening at commercial scale. This is an industry that is potential, theoretical, hypothetical. There have been tests in various parts of the world by different companies and by different states, but this isn't something that's happening on a large scale yet. So yeah, it's speculative and it's industrial. Sometimes proponents of seabed mining talk about harvesting, or they talk about other words that don't involve mining or minerals or extraction. But seabed mining, in order to extract the amount of minerals that folks are talking about to make this industry make money for anyone, we would be talking about major industrial scale. These are some of the machines that would be proposed. The one on the right, the green one, is what would be used to collect nodules on the abyssal plains. And that white machine would be something that would crush up seamounts and then take those. These are real big machines. This would be an industrial endeavor on a massive scale, like a hydrocarbon project or other mining kind of endeavors. And just kind of walking through nodules just as an example, partly because it's something I'm familiar with, but partly because it's at least in the international waters, what would be on the horizon first. This image on the left of your screen shows at the bottom this vehicle, which could be similar to the vehicle in green on the right, kind of running along the bottom of the seabed. It's like a big vacuum that sucks up the nodules and also whatever else is there, and then would take up this long tube. It's called a riser pipe. All the nodules and the silt in the water would go up there, would get washed off on the top of the boat, and then spit back into the ocean, everything except the nodules themselves. So the crushed up pieces of mineral and the silt in the water, somewhere in the midwater column or mesopelagic zone. And there are no regulations yet saying exactly how deep that would have to be, and that's a point of debate that's happening right now because there would be different effects on different parts of the water column depending how deep it would be. And we could go a lot in a different time. We could go a lot into the environmental impacts of that, and I'm happy to chat through it later. But for now, just to kind of have a sense of how this might work. So there are sustainability concerns with seabed mining, and they're not just environmental. There's the whole gamut of the E, S, and G, environment, social, governance concerns. And again, in the time we have today, we won't go into deeply into any of them, but as you can see on the left, kind of thinking about the environment, the top is a graphic by DOSI, Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative. If you're not familiar with them and you are interested in deep ocean, I would say check them out. I'm a little biased because I volunteer with them, but it's a science advocacy organization that they advocate as an organization only for the inclusion of science in policymaking, not for particular policy positions. So this is just a graphic of all of the ecosystem services the deep ocean provides. And then I put in a little brief about fishing, fisheries and seabed mining interaction. The IATTC, the Inter-American Tropical Tuna Commission, and the Western Pacific Fisheries Council Commission. I'm sorry, I always get that acronym wrong. They have both been looking at seabed mining in this past year. In fact, we presented some of this work on the potential interactions as recently as August of this year, and both of those organizations are discussing how to engage with the International Seabed Authority. And something that I'm realizing, let me see. Okay, I do have a slide on it. So we'll talk also briefly about social concerns. There's underwater cultural heritage as we know it under the UNESCO conventions, UCH as defined, both tangible ships and objects in the water, but also intangible, cultural connection to those things, cultural connection to the ocean. And that conversation has really expanded in the last 2 years to include broader cultural connection to the ocean and origin stories involving the deep and not just UCH, capital UCH. So there's been a lot of local community and indigenous opposition to seabed mining. Different special rapporteurs for human rights are getting involved in this conversation and raising human rights issues around seabed mining. And then there's governance issues. So as we're going to talk about on the next slide, seabed mining is being explored both in domestic waters in countries' own EEZs and also in the area, capital A area, the seabed, beyond national jurisdiction. And everywhere that it's being explored, there are governance issues, reasons to think maybe the regulations either don't exist or aren't being enforced, or there are questions about propriety of relationships with contractors. So again, it just seems like it's hard to identify a place where seabed mining is being looked at that doesn't kind of raise the set of governance red flags or questions. As you know, in this audience, you probably know this better than I do, but there is, the area, and then there's the countries' EEZs, and of course, countries control their exclusive economic zones out to 200 nautical miles, plus the seabed on their continental shelf, which, as you know, can get a little murky because sometimes those claims can be right up next to each other or even overlap. But in the international space, the International Seabed Authority was set up in 1994 in Kingston, Jamaica. Exploration regulations exist. Exploitation regulations for commercial mining do not exist. And they are under negotiation. And the International Seabed Authority has this interesting mandate to both effectively protect the marine environment and to steward use of the resources of the area. And of course, as we'll get into later on in the presentation, there's this concept of the common heritage of humankind to be upheld and other sort of premises and ideas that the ISA is operating under. Um, Countries evaluating seabed mining in their national waters include Norway, the Cook Islands, Japan, Papua New Guinea, Tonga, and India. India with a small asterisk just because almost certain that some of the exploration is happening in India's own EEZ, but that's actually something, if any of you know that for a fact, I would love to know because it's something I'm just working on confirming. There's definitely work being done by India in the Indian Ocean to explore the seabed. Questioning the need for seabed minerals, I sometimes feel that the conversation around seabed minerals starts in the middle, starts kind of assuming we need these minerals for the green transition. We can get them from the seabed in any economically or technically feasible way. And the question, it's almost like we assume those things. We use a global conversation around seabed mining, and then we start talking about like, ooh, but is it worth it? Is it too bad for the ocean? How much do we need them? Where would we get them? And we jump into the details and we jump into the effects. And I would back us up, in an ideal world and say, do we need these minerals? Which, do we need cobalt, nickel, manganese, and copper? And is the deep ocean the place to get them? And is there a way to actually extract them that makes economic or technical sense? So I would say that, and again, any of these topics I'm happy to go deeper into, but I would say the technical readiness of seabed mining has not been proven. It's never been done at scale, and all of the tests to date have had massive challenges. Something that we don't talk enough about. It's hard to get, never mind hard to get ocean professionals, but then when you get the finance people and the engineers, like how do we get everybody in a room? But when you do talk to engineers, they all raise these like unique deep sea operational challenges. These things would be happening on a scale much deeper than oil and gas in most cases. And then also just how much would this cost? Like literally, we talk a lot about the benefit sharing, but a lot of the financial models I've seen are pointing out more and more everything would have to go right for this to even be a cash positive endeavor, never mind something that would produce a lot of benefits to be shared. And this is just about something that is, without going into all the details, the metals market is really volatile. It goes up and it goes down, and it's hard to peg it to anything, even, for example, EV production. But seabed mining would be a very expensive, largely fixed cost industry. So that makes it really hard to be sure you're going to make profits. One of the reasons that the metals, market is volatile is that there's innovation away from these minerals on the seabed. All of the new generation batteries don't use cobalt, nickel, manganese, or much less of each of those. And so, really, I've heard it said very succinctly that investment in deep seabed mining is a bet against innovation. It's a bet against the fact that batteries are changing every day to be made of cheaper, less controversial, geopolitically controversial materials. So there's a lot of reports. Something that I had to put this in bold for my own self to not forget to say it. Lithium is not found in relevant quantities in polymetallic nodules on seamounts or hydrothermal vents. So lithium is really, in a lot of places in the world, the mineral that's being most sought after for this green transition. And there's no lithium here. So I think that's a really important something to start a conversation with. And so, just from a financial and risk and liability perspective, which is really where my, lawyer nerd brain always goes, there are no regulations for seabed mining. So imagine why would a company or, an investor or an endeavor want to jump in and start seabed mining when it would be like playing a game where the rules are changing under your feet and the sand is shifting. So there's no regulatory certainty, there's no social license. We talked about indigenous and local community opposition, but there's also youth opposition, and we'll go through that in a second. The rest of the opposition. Reputational confidence is something we didn't jump into as much, but just thinking about seems in every sphere that seabed mining is being looked at, there are issues around propriety of some of the proponents or, how a government is handling criticism even from within or from its own environmental regulators. So there's just this question of who would be a reliable provider of seabed minerals. The financial sector has excluded seabed mining. I'm not going to run through all of this, but it's not just It's not just environmentalists that don't think this is a great idea at this juncture. And I think that's something that maybe doesn't get enough play in some circles. And then just bringing us to where we are now. Um, as we come up on 15 minutes. So we just talked about the financial sector, but insurers, all of these insurers and big reinsurers, who are the insurance companies who insure the insurers, are excluding seabed mining. There are a lot of companies that have said they won't use minerals from the seabed and they won't let their money be invested in seabed minerals. And those include many companies, but including the ones below. SAP recently joined, as did Apple. And by joined, I mean signed this statement that said they won't use seabed minerals and a bunch of other criteria. More than 800 marine experts from 44 countries have caused for a pause or a ban on seabed mining. Civil society, the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition. Oh, I'm gonna go back one. And 32 countries have said either ban, pause, or moratorium on seabed mining, just saying no seabed mining, not now, not under the information we have. And lastly, this is where we're at kind of with the International Seabed Authority just got a new Secretary General after 8 years. She will be taking over in January. That's when that transition happens. There's a lot of focus on finishing regulations at the International Seabed Authority. I'm not sure if any of you have attended those meetings, but some folks talk about finishing them in 2025. The regulations are very far from done. We're not talking about crossing T's and dotting I's. There remain major conceptual differences and major disagreements, a lot of them related to the geopolitics we're going to talk about today. So I think that there was a report that came out earlier this year that, or a peer-reviewed article that said there are 30 major outstanding issues in the international seabed mining regulations. And that article found that it would be highly unrealistic for them to be finalized by next year. One of the lead companies and most vocal proponents of seabed mining reported that they only have $500,000 in cash in their last shareholder call. So there seems to be this kind of timeline rush in a lot of this. And in the countries exploring seabed mining in their national waters, there's actual and prospective legal action, and they're facing local and global opposition. The US government recently denied a request to open an area near American Samoa for licensing for exploration. And again, this green transition narrative faces increased scrutiny. And the last thing I'll say is, as all of this happens, even if regulations were finalized, the companies and the countries that have taken a stand against seabed mining, or at least not now, it's not just that they're waiting for regulations. They're saying the science isn't there. They're saying we don't understand the economic and social implications. So I want to be clear that finalizing regulations for seabed mining doesn't address the concerns around it. So with that, that's my time, and I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Bobby Joe, for the insightful presentation and also for dealing with the pressing questions whether we truly need it or not, deep sea bed mining. I think you've given us a lot to think about, especially with regards to the potential benefits and risks, both economically and, as you said, environmentally. Now, as we shift our focus a little bit, I think it is important to explore how these questions fit into the broader geopolitical landscape. And in order to help us navigate this complex terrain, we have Andras, who will dive into the intricate global dynamics at play here. Basically, where national interests, international regulations, and environmental concerns intersect. Ambassador Andras Zoreni joined the Global Cities Hub after 20 years of distinguished diplomatic career. He worked in different capacities in Brussels, covering EU affairs, Washington, D.C., dealing with bilateral relations, and in Geneva, working with the United Nations and other international organizations. With a deep knowledge of international relations, he always focuses on new global developments and emerging challenges. Dr. Andras, you may have the floor.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this very timely and great debate. I believe my invitation is mostly due to my experience in geopolitics and multilateral diplomacy. So I will focus on those aspects in my presentation, which I will share with you right now. And I hope you see it well. Let's start immediately with the geopolitical trends we all need to consider when we talk about deep sea mining or rather other activities. When we are talking about geopolitics, we usually talk about power and especially about power shift. There are, of course, different classifications of power, but I would use here, for sake of simplicity, the hard power, soft power distinction, saying that the three main categories are military power, economic power, and the soft power. In our case, for our topic, of course, it's the economic power of the different states, which is the most important factor. And we see it very clearly that we are in a period when the economic powers of the different states are very much changing, especially in relative terms. We are also seeing a power shift in a systemic way. Of course, the second half of the 20th century was defined by a bipolar political and economic system. Then we experienced a short period of what scholars usually call the unipolar period. And now clearly everybody agrees on that we are in or we are heading to a multipolar world power structure. The other important geopolitical trend I would like to mention is the governance shift. And the governance shift can mean several things. For me, it means mostly three important things. One is the domestic governance shift, where I would describe it as a change in a general approach. The second half of the 20th century, again, was very much a period when most of the countries around the world believed in multilateral cooperation, especially the United Nations system. And now we see more and more countries where, with the change of government, you can experience a change in the approach towards the willingness of multilateral cooperation. And obviously, multilateral cooperation can only work effectively if the participating member states are all willing to reach a consensus of the participating parties. If not, then we see a slowdown or a total block of the processes. I will come back to that later. We also see a geographical shift in governance. We saw the United Nations system and the World Bank, IMF financial system as a universal system built up after the Second World War. But later on, we experienced a period where more and more regional integrations were created and sometimes replaced for certain issues the universal UN approaches. And we saw similar tendencies in the financial regulations and financial system with the creation of multilateral development banks. To this governance shift, there's a new layer which is added the last decades, and this is the geopolitical governance shift, where we see that the universal UN system or the geographical regional integration systems were replaced or at least parallelly created other forms of cooperation like the G7, the G20, or just recently the BRICS. And I think this is very important to see that member states are considering alternatives to the classical multilateral cooperation. The technological shift is also important, especially because the effects of climate change, the digitalization, and as it was mentioned, the energy transition. And last but not least, a shift of public attention. And here we clearly see a very strong environmental interest, a very strong advocacy from the youth, from non-state actors, from NGOs, as was previously mentioned. And for me, the interesting point here is that the ocean is at the intersection of all these geopolitical shifts. And that's why it can very easily become a new battleground. And also we will see very unusual coalitions of interest in this area. I will not talk about the resources because it was brilliantly presented by Bobby Joe. The only point I would like to make here is that, as she said, deep sea mining is not happening yet. But for me, it's more a challenge than an omission, because if it's not happening yet, then we are in a very rare situation when international regulation can precede the real actions on the ground. To give you the contrary example, with artificial intelligence, for example, the whole international community, let's be honest, are running after the events happening. And the regulation of AI is now one of the biggest headaches because it's already happening in our real life. With deep sea mining, we have the chance to advance and to precede the actions on the ground. Multi-stakeholder presence is very, very important. Deep sea mining is an issue where, of course, nation states will discuss around the table, but it's about enterprise company interests. And economic interest can always influence in strange ways the national positions. And while most of the challenges concerning the ocean previously were bilateral, just to mention an example, the South China Sea, this one, because of the area being beyond the limits of national jurisdiction, is a multilateral challenge we all face. And we are talking about multilateralism. Let me just show you two quotes. One is well known from Dag Hammarskjöld, former Secretary General, who said the United Nations was not created in order to bring us to heaven, but in order to save us from hell. And I think it's time to reflect and perhaps challenge this quote and say multilateralism could not solve all our problems of hell, but perhaps it can be a good tool now in our hands to save our future and bring us to the better future when talking about environment and deep sea mining. The other quote is less known because it's from my former professor at university, who said, "We sign agreements when we trust each other and we use them when we don't." You will understand why is it important in my eyes. It's important because the authority, the International Seabed Authority, was established in a consensual manner by countries, a coalition of willings who wanted to act together. But when national concerns will meet economic enterprise interests and the environmental concerns of the general public, all this goodwill will very quickly be modified, and it will be much more difficult to come to common agreement. Already, I think the roles of the authority are conflicting. It has to regulate, it has to protect, and it has to license, right? Licensing is one of the financial resources of the authority, protecting and regulating the mining and protecting the environment. In my eyes, it's very conflictual. So by definition, we will see countries who are in one camp and countries who are in another camp. From a geopolitical point of view, what is very interesting with the authority is that we see unusual coalitions of countries. Among the supporters, we know we have China, Japan, already two countries who not always agree on everything. Norway, Russia, the US. You rarely see the US, China, and Russia in the main camp in the United Nations system, unless we talk about disarmament, for example, where, by the way, it doesn't work really well. And another point on the moratorium, which was also already mentioned, and I totally agree with what Bobicho said, but I would like to point out that these are countries who are not the front runners of the activities, right? We might experience a situation where the group, however big it will be, supporting the moratorium will be a group of countries who are not actively doing it. But those who are actively doing it will be outside of this coalition, and the two camps will practically not interfere. And last but not least, the question of enforcement, because I think even if the regulation will go ahead, the really big question, what we usually see in multilateral geopolitics is the question of enforcement, question of who and how will enforce the rules and regulations. And let me also share with you some parallels from other multilateral organizations, which might help, in my view, understand a little bit what we can expect from the future in geopolitical terms. I already mentioned the Conference on Disarmament, the Nuclear Ban Treaty, which is the great example of when countries who has no nuclear weapon agree on a moratorium or a ban, but those who possess nuclear weapons don't care about this moratorium. I'm a little bit afraid that we might see very similar dynamics in deep sea mining regulation, that those countries who will oppose will have no influence on the activities of those who do it underwater. Another example, the WTO, when I said it's rare that US and China are, for example, on the same position. Well, the WTO is a classic example when they could not agree on something and the activity of the WTO slowed down and the WTO appellate body ceased to function. So if we will see interests which are very, very opposing within the organization, it might have these negative impacts. I will skip the other part, just one more point here, and this is the additional layer of other actors, non-state actors, because I think history shows us that the influence of non-state actors in usual, but in multilateral spheres particular, is very, very important. We mentioned already the company interest. We know that there are several observer non-state actors within ISA. We don't know how many of them are real NGOs, how many of them are GONGOs, government-financed NGOs or government-supported NGOs. We know that environmental NGOs are one of the loudest non-state actors in multilateral scene. And we also see very clearly that the public opinion is more and more interested in ocean issues, in blue economy and in environmental protection. I think the NGO's role cannot be denied, and a very interesting historic parallel is the Rio Earth Summit in 1992. This is the school book example because that was the first when a member state, Vanuatu, invited Greenpeace to represent the country interests in a negotiation. Something similar can happen here as well. Just one or 2 points from the other actors. Historically, we know that multinational corporations and transnational corporations periodically had a very important influence on national decision making, and I guess mining companies or mining companies who consider to do these activities will have this very important influence in the future. And as I mentioned, it's nice when we have common goals and we all step up for the protection of the ocean and the regulation of the activities. But once the economic national interest is behind, the negotiating position of a given country can slightly or seriously change course. Strong public opinion, I already mentioned earlier, so I will not spend time on this one. Just a short remark on the reasons why I think non-state actors can be important players is the increasing power, be it population or economic power, the willingness, the increasing financial means non-state actors have in general, and also in environmental issues, the new communication technologies, which is very, very important to shape the public opinion, so to exercise soft power, and the networking of these actors. So to conclude, my very personal opinion is that we can see in this area, based on the geopolitical shifts, 3 possible scenarios. One, business as usual, and I would be a little bit more skeptical than you were, Bobby Joe, endless negotiations, not by 2025, not by 2026, but if the interests are really colliding, it can become endless negotiations. Institutional freeze, which is, in my view, the worst case scenario, because it blocks the activity of the authority, and the ocean will become a new Wild West. And I heard you that companies don't like to engage when regulation is not there, but it's also true that companies might engage because there's no regulation, so nobody will tell us what to do or what not to do. I hope that we will arrive to the third one, which is small steps, even with or without enforcement, because in my eyes, that's the next stage of any multilateral negotiations, how we will enforce what we will agree on. And I think this will be another challenge and perhaps a topic for another discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andras, for your excellent unpacking of the geopolitical dynamics surrounding deep seabed mining. You've highlighted this quite complex interplay of national interests and international regulations, and I think we now have a bit of a clearer picture of the broader global landscape. Now, we'll shift our focus to the vital role of NGOs and youth representation in this conversation. And for that, we have Rosalind Kamp, who is an ocean advocate and early career ocean professional. She graduated with a Bachelor in Economics and a Master's in Ocean Governance, and is a founding member of Sustainable Ocean Alliance Malta, actively working on various environmental issues. Rosalind is also an alumnus of the IOI and will explore how these voices are shaping the call for systemic change in the deep seabed mining debate. Rosalind, the floor is yours.
Okay, first let me just share my screen. And here we go. Can you confirm, Cosmin, it's working?
It's working.
Okay, perfect. So thanks to both of the other speakers because they set a really good foundation for my presentation now. I'm going to focus specifically around the involvement of youth and NGOs in this emerging landscape around deep sea mining negotiations. So my own interest in deep sea mining stems from my own research background on effective management and implementation of marine protected areas, and my research interest on furthering that to study area-based management tools in the high seas, including the deep sea. I think given a lot of recent agreements, including the High Seas Treaty and now the ongoing negotiations of the Mining Code, these topics are becoming ever more relevant as the need and also the opportunities to effectively protect biodiversity for future generations grows. I do work as a consultant for Sustainable Ocean Alliance, which is a youth-led nonprofit that's centered around restoring the ocean health in our own lifetime. And my work with SOA focuses on providing a platform for youth voices and funding opportunities so that they can raise awareness and implement projects centered around restoring and protecting the ocean. And right now I oversee all of their deep sea mining grants all over the world. So the importance of inclusion. So as a Maltese, this conversation really comes close to home, given that Arvid Pardo, a Maltese diplomat, addressed the UN General Assembly in 1967 on this topic. He spoke of the common heritage of mankind, which Bobby Jo mentioned earlier, and you'll be seeing throughout my entire speech, specifically referring to the deep seabed. Pardo's argument was informed by the technological developments of his time, that they were thinking that deep sea mining might go ahead, and he really raised a crucial question, which was who should benefit from these resources. His argument was that the world's least developed nations should be prioritized. And so this concept leads directly into two encompassing points of my presentation, which first is if we consider the deep seabed as the common heritage of all humanity, it logically follows then that all sectors of society must have a voice in how these resources are managed. Their involvement is crucial in ensuring that decisions are made from the long-term benefit of humankind, rather than just driven by short-term economic or political gains. And the second point being the geological imbalance. So I think when Pardo raised this issue in the 1960s, the geopolitical inequality in resources was already evident. Nations with the technological and financial means to extract the resources from the deep sea would inevitably profit, leaving developing countries behind. And you fast forward to today, and we continue to see this imbalance, which is even furthered by the influence of private companies. Wealthier industrialized nations that are equipped with advanced technologies are first in line to exploit these resources, while the developing countries, those that are really the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, are promised marginal economic benefits. And as Bobby just said, recent research has shown that the proposed benefit sharing mechanisms are really likely to result in insignificant economic returns for these nations, reinforcing that global inequality divide. Worse still, deep sea mining may amplify climate vulnerabilities, as the destruction of deep sea ecosystems could weaken natural climate regulators. So on the deep sea timescale, as young advocates, we see the failure of current international treaties, which is really evident in today's triple planetary crisis. The deep sea operates on timescales that really extends far beyond human governance. Some deep sea corals can live for thousands of years, and ecosystem recovery occurs over millennia. So the policies we enact today are driven by the short-term, immediate economic, political, company interests, and they could damage the environments irreversibly. So I think it's clear that our governance structures need to also reflect the deep sea's timescales to protect both these ecosystems and the generations to come. The deep sea is not only just a reservoir of biodiversity, but it also plays a critical role in climate regulation and nutrient cycling. The impacts of human activities, such as deep sea mining, may never even be fully understood within our limited time frame, potentially leading to the damage that transcends our current understanding. Some proponents of deep sea mining argue that restoration efforts can be implemented in areas from which resources are extracted. However, this claim is really unfounded given our limited knowledge of the deep sea ecosystems in the first place and their intricate processes. Additionally, the timeframes required for restoration often exceed the lifespan of the institutions that are proposing such actions. How can we really expect to implement and measure restoration activities when the organisms themselves operate on timescales that are so much longer? I think this is precisely why NGOs, youth, civil society groups in the world are calling for a precautionary pause or even a moratorium on deep sea mining. In order to adopt a more precautious approach, we really need to understand that we have the scientific understanding and the policies that align with the deep sea's timescale. So what does meaningful inclusion look like for NGOs and for youth at these negotiations? And what positive change can arise from elevating these voices? I think youth aren't just advocating for their own interests, but they're advocating for those yet to come, really ensuring the long-term protection of marine ecosystems. These high-level political negotiations have historically been filled with jargon and seen as out of reach for the general public. Yet these young ocean leaders are showing that they not only deserve a seat at the table, but that they can meaningfully contribute to these complex discussions. So SOA received official observer status at the ISA and is the first youth organization to gain this observer status. I think this provides an opportunity and a platform for these young advocates, and SOA has also pledged to ensure the inclusion of youth representatives from nations that are underrepresented in the ISA negotiations. These are some photos of the negotiations and the delegations this year from SOA. So they brought together voices from across the globe, including young researchers focused on the deep sea and also local advocates that are working in their own communities to educate their people. This diversity showed from youth from different regions uniting to voice concerns about the impacts of ecosystem destruction. And the delegates were able to connect with member states, bring their concerns directly to the decision makers, and then create valuable networks that will continue to build momentum when they go back to their home countries. I think the issue of geopolitical inequality in representation becomes really evident when considering the participation in these negotiations is also often dictated by the financial capacity to do so. A majority of the states that have ratified UNCLOS are represented at the ISA. However, only 36 states hold the power to vote in the ISA's primary decision-making body, which is the Council. And unfortunately, participation in ISA's broader assembly has also been limited, with the ISA often failing to achieve 50% quorum. This is due to many states, particularly those from developing regions, being unable to participate due to outstanding debts to the ISA, or not even having the financial resources to send their delegates to these negotiations. I think this is really alarming, as these are the states that are often the most vulnerable to the environmental effects of deep sea mining. So just to quote that youth are not merely passive recipients of current decisions, but are becoming active architects of their future. They're highlighting how the decisions made today will directly affect the ecosystems and economies they will inherit, work in, and lead in the coming decades. This inclusion of youth voices was also echoed at the most recent ISA negotiations, with the president of Palau saying, "The voices of youth need to be honored at the decision-making table to strengthen ocean governance." I think beyond the ISA negotiations, we've also seen an uptick in a lot of youth involvement and state governments creating youth advisory boards or youth ambassadors. So I think it's definitely seeing a positive turn in the past few years with more youth inclusion. However, despite the critical relevance of deep sea mining, I think much of the public remains unaware that this issue is currently under negotiation. And in many cases, it's the youth and NGOs who are stepping up to bridge this gap. They're educating their communities and standing against unnecessary extractivism. So they're not only raising awareness about the topic itself, but also highlighting potential consequences for their own local communities if deep sea mining moves forward. We rarely see governments holding public forums or educational events to inform their citizens about the decisions being made on their behalf. How often do they invite public opinions on these negotiations? While we elect these governments to represent us in these spaces, we must also recognize that representation should involve an ongoing dialogue. So now I'd like to show you a little bit about what youth involvement on the topic of deep sea looks like. SOA's youth-led initiatives have kind of addressed the literacy gap a little bit, reaching over 1.6 million people through many different capacity building events, conferences, outreach efforts, and social media campaigns. Since 2019, SOA has been working on campaigning against deep sea mining and has awarded 48 deep sea mining grants to youth-led projects across 34 different countries. These projects are entirely youth-driven and encompass a wide range of initiatives. Some focus on educational events that raise awareness within their local communities, while others involve stakeholder engagement to foster dialogue or direct advocacy with government officials, urging them to adopt a precautionary approach to deep sea mining. I think these grassroots efforts are really building momentum and amplifying the awareness of this topic on a global scale. I'll just highlight 3 amazing projects that are ongoing. The first one being from Panama called Deep Dive Debate. They're engaging students in discussions on deep sea mining, first through educating them through a film called Deep Rising, which is a documentary about deep sea mining's context, then through some workshops followed by model UN-style debates. The goal is to help young people develop diplomatic and policy skills while deepening their understanding on this issue. Second, a project from Belize called Deep Connections, Deeper Risks uses creative blend of art, education, outreach to raise awareness on the risks of deep sea mining. The project kind of aims to build an emotional and intellectual connection between participants and the deep ocean. And thirdly, a project by SOA Ghana, which is focused on empowering journals to report on environmental impacts of deep sea mining. They provide media training to ensure that journalists can accurately cover this issue and raise public awareness in Ghana. Beyond these initiatives, SOA also partnered with NGOs and garnered over 320,000 signatures on its petition for a deep sea mining moratorium. This growing global conversation sparked by youth leadership and civil society efforts is gaining momentum and expanding beyond the confines of the typical political disclosure. And I think that kind of brings to the next point of really the need for systematic change. We're at a critical point where the scarcity of minerals to drive economies presents an opportunity to rethink our production consumption systems. It's not only a moment about resource scarcity, but it also reflects the geopolitical tensions that arise from competing interests. Instead of exploiting a new frontier, like the deep sea, we should invest in transitioning into a circular economy, one that focuses on responsible production, consumption, and reuse of materials. The claim that we must extract resources from a new ecosystem to meet our growing consumption overlooks the more pressing issue, which is that the systematic inequalities that underlie global resource distribution and decision-making. I think we urgently need to transition to cleaner and lower emissions. However, claiming that this is the way while excessive resource extraction has led to the deforestation, pollution, environmental degradation, and the issues that we currently lie. These systematic issues can't really be resolved by just increasing access to new resources and continuing on with the same status quo of the system. And so how can we ensure to further inclusivity of youth, of NGOs, of civil society. First being to encourage more youth participation by actively promoting the involvement of more youth in the ISA meetings, and also provide them with a platform to deliver statements and host side events to not only amplify their voice, but to also build their own capacity in ocean governance from a really early stage. By engaging these youth early, it really can foster a deeper understanding and expertise in these areas. The second could be that member states could invite youth representatives to join their delegations at ISA meetings. Some states already include stakeholders from civil society, science, industry in their delegations, and thereby incorporating young people would allow them to participate in discussions and share their perspectives as these positions are being shaped. And the third is to just facilitate more open dialogues, as I mentioned in my previous slides, to just establish more national, regional, and global dialogues to create these spaces for youth to express their views and raise their concerns alongside officials and elected representatives. So as we navigate this critical juncture, I urge everyone here to reflect on the importance of youth inclusivity in their initiatives. By engaging and empowering youth in these conversations, we can foster more innovative solutions and ensure that the voices of the next generations are heard and valued. I want to thank you so much for this opportunity. It's been a great honor to share the space and to give some insight onto youth involvement in this space. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosalind, for shedding light on the crucial role of NGOs and the youth in advocating for governance structures that are beneficial in the long term and take into account future generations and their needs, of course. It's clear that these perspectives are an integral part in shaping a more inclusive and sustainable approach to deep seabed mining. Now, I want to very quickly thank all our speakers, and with this, we're going to move to the next stage, which is the open Q&A session. So please feel free to make use of the raise hand function in Teams, and we will let you use your microphones and your cameras. Also, in the meantime, I'll take a question and then I'll look a little bit through the chat and see what we have over there as well. I'm already seeing some people raising their hands. So let's see. I think Ali was the first one. Ali, you can use your microphone and your camera.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we're hearing you.
Oh, thank you very much, moderator, and thank you very much the wonderful three presenters who have given us a very insightful account of the state of seabed mining and also the position of youth in addressing the concerns of the ocean. My first question is open to three presenters. Now, recently, UN has concluded, by the way, I am assistant professor from the Maldives National University. We are a huge ocean state, as you know, the Maldives, and 70% of the ocean covers the earth or the world, and therefore we believe the islands, small island states, will have a brighter future very soon, hopefully. My question is the recently concluded High Seas Treaty. Does it cover any concern that you have presented here, seabed mining? Or is it only addresses the biodiversity, protection of biodiversity? That is the first question. The second one is, like Google Earth, is there any technology available where they can scan and or screen the seabed and show us that's the way? This is my second question, and I think I fully support the Ms. Roslyn, uh, the recommendation that national delegations should contain youth or young delegates as well, which is, I think, a very powerful message. I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Since this question was addressed to all three speakers, you can all pitch in, but please very quickly. We have only 20 minutes left, and this applies as well to the participants asking questions. Please keep them as brief as possible, and we appreciate as well if you could introduce yourselves so we know your country and your background. Andras, would you like to go first?
Yes, if just a quick reaction to the question, if I may. For me, the fact that the High Seas Treaty was accepted, negotiated, and adopted, to be very precise, is a good news. It's a positive development, which can mean that also at the ISA, the discussions will bring fruit next year or the year after. However, I think the economic interests are a little bit different in the two cases. So I would not bring a total parallel, but once again, for me, it's a positive sign that on ocean issues, member states are able to get an agreement in multilateral sphere. Over.
Thank you, Andres. I'll just add, I think that it's an interesting question. I also agree it's a very positive outcome. I think that it's a smart question, and I've watched entire webinars based on an answer to that question. You know, how are these two things related or not related? And I would say in this sphere that one, I can share those with you if you'd like to. They're not done by me. I was definitely in learning mode. And also, there are these questions with marine genetic resources. You know, does the International Seabed Authority steward only the areas that literally just the bottom? If a shrimp jumps off the bottom, are they now in BB&J territory? These are ongoing questions, and I think the high level point is, as we move deeper into the 21st century, what is the role of the International Seabed Authority, and how does that relate not only to the BB&J Treaty, but to the biodiversity treaties and other kind of moves forward in our global governance. And for mapping, I would just say, I don't think there's a Google Earth equivalent, but there are a lot of high resolution maps in the discrete areas that have been mapped on the seabed. The whole seafloor is close to being mapped, but at very large resolution. I was on a call with some marine archaeologists the other day, and they were saying that we're far from having anywhere except in coastal areas the kind of resolution they need to see like a ship. For example, you could see like huge city blocks potentially, but not discrete things. So I think that answer is a little nuanced, and the mapping's getting better all the time, but depending what you need it for, it is or isn't there.
I've seen also a very interesting question in chat. It was from Maureen, who said, I feel like developing countries, because they lack capacity and are left out. How does ISA ensure that they also benefit? Maybe a very, very short perspective from each speaker.
I'll start. I guess that I mentioned that a little bit in my speech, but I think that's one of the points, is maybe the way that it was set up actually hinders them from, if they have outstanding debts or if they don't have the capacity to even go. First of all, that hinders them from being able to be there, to have a voice. And then in the capacity of their literacy and their educational opportunities. I don't really see that the ISA provides those, but maybe one of you guys can speak on that note.
Joe, you go first. Okay. I think nowadays we talk a lot about this distinction, whether developing countries have the capacity or not. Let me answer this question from a different angle. Multilateralism is a forward-looking thing because every country who is member of the organization, be it developed or developing country, has a seat around the table and has a word to agree on the final decisions, be it documents, be it decisions, recommendations, and so on. So I think the ISA is exactly the place where developing countries can make sure that their point of view is presented and is heard, and the regulation at the end will be hopefully a conclusion and an agreement of all participating states. Whether this will help or not the development of a given country, that's another question, but I think that would worth another discussion. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll add briefly that the ISA does have some things set up in its structure to the original conceptualization did try to prioritize and include developing states. There's something called the enterprise that is, a part of the International Seabed Authority that is supposed to be a mining contractor on its own and share the benefits. The enterprise, a director was just installed, but the enterprise all these years later has not been set up. There's also zones that were put aside as reserved areas. If a developed country claims an area, they have to give half of that area to reserve for developing countries. Again, a topic for another time, but those developing countries have partnered with private global north entities to use these reserved areas. And it seems that the contracts, it's questionable how much they're benefiting the sponsoring states versus how much of those benefits would go to the global north corporations. And I would say that, again, I would question what benefits. Like, let's look at the how much are you getting for these minerals on the market? How much is it going to cost you to take them out of the ocean?
Thank you all. Now we're going to take a question from Sunil Shastri. Sunil, please keep it brief, and you have the floor. You can unmute.
Many thanks, IOI, friends and family, Antonella, Avni, Cosmin, and thank you very much, Bobby, Rosalind, and Andreas for your fantastic presentations. My name is Sunil Murlidhar Shastri. I'm an independent consultant, educator, and speaker in ocean and environmental governance. Very quickly, I've been with IOI since 1982. And Avni will remember the very first lecture he gave me then. But anyway, and then I'm also the IOI director for India for the Ocean Literacy Program, the IOI Ocean Academy. I just want to make a very quick 3 points. The first one is that the panel may or may not agree that Arvid Pardo would be turning in his grave the way we have marginalized the common heritage of mankind principle that he so espoused. He thought maybe 95% of the ocean will become common heritage of mankind. And somebody talked of developing countries. And I thought that he might have thought that developing countries might benefit from, but that's a different story. The second bit is that given the ocean mining has not really happened in the last 4 decades since I met Avni, and it's unlikely to happen in a hurry. Does the panel think, so this is the real question, does the panel think that it might be appropriate for the International Seabed Authority to take over, right? Take over may be the wrong word, but take over the BBNJ implementation, because rather than creating a new United Nations organization or bureaucracy, because a combined organization, which is looking at mining on the one side, but also protection of the biodiversity on the other side, may give checks and balances and perhaps more in favor of the biodiversity. Thank you.
Thank you. Any of the speakers would like to go for a follow-up to that?
I'm very curious for the co-panelists' thoughts on this, but my first thought is that The International Seabed Authority, as you all well know, is a UN-affiliated agency, but not a United Nations agency, and there's been a lot of governance and oversight problems with that. The Secretary General actually was being investigated and said, oh, you can't send this up to the oversight agency for the UN, like we investigate ourselves here. That's, I think, highly problematic from a governance sphere. So I think that with as we see this organization moving forward, professionalizing, modernizing, and trying to organize itself, I don't know that the ISA, the new Secretary General, has said one of her first orders of business will be kind of dealing with transparency issues. And I think that the ISA, according to my humble opinion, is not probably set to take on a whole new realm of governance right now. And I wouldn't say that we would want BBNJ to be at a UN affiliate. I think we want that squarely within our United Nations system. I think there's a lot of interesting parallels, of course, but I don't know that it makes sense to fold the ISA, the BBNJ into the ISA governance structure. I would also just question, one of the premises of your conversation. I do think that seabed mining, there is a hurry by, a lot of well-funded states and corporations right now. So I think that, again, personally, I think at the ISA there's a push, but I think we're more likely to see it happen in national waters. But obviously, those two things are a little bit intertwined.
Just a quick one, just to say that the current, the incumbent Secretary General, Michael Lodge, is a good friend, and we in fact studied at LSE a couple of batches, same program. We studied the same program a couple of years away from each other. But anyway, that's for good or bad, I don't know. But we'll see what the new Secretary General Carvalho does, and we expect much from her. But thank you for that. But yeah, carry on with your.
Thank you. And just to be clear, absolutely not a criticism of the current Secretary General or the ISA. I just think that it seems the ISA has a pending Article 154 review. The ISA has a lot of things that I think it is trying to do as an organization to move forward to next steps. And again, finalize regulations. It seems like there's a lot on the ISA's plate right now, never mind adding BBNJ to the mix.
Thank you all very much. Now I'm going to invite Abdallah to ask a question. Abdallah, you can unmute.
Can I speak now? Yeah, thank you very much, Cosman. Thank you. This is Abdullah Kushla from Libyan Maritime Administration. My pleasure to attend this webinar. Thank you, Cosman. My question is regarding how can we consider the deep sea mining as one of the pillars of sustainable bioeconomy? So really, even now, we didn't find the solution. We don't. So we are waiting for the mining code. We are waiting for the scientist results. But at this stage, could we consider it as sustainable? Thank you very much.
Nothing has happened.
Seems to me
Andreas?
it's a difficult question. But just one very general remark on that, if I may. I think sustainability is more a concept and a principle than a very precisely defined action. So I think when we are talking about the regulation of deep sea mining, we have to take into account the aspect of sustainability and the goal of a sustainable future for the next generations and for the planet. But there's no really a definition we can apply in every single cases. So the decision makers has to make the right call, how they will reflect the principle of sustainability in the negotiations and hopefully in the outcome of the negotiations. Thank you.
I would add that there are sustainability experts who have looked at this, the UN Environmental Programme Sustainable Finance Initiative, the European Academy Science Advisory Council, and the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures, and those were all included in that list that we didn't run through in my presentation on exclusions of seabed mining, at least as it stands now, from sustainable blue economy. So saying like all of those folks in their findings found seabed mining to be not sustainable, at least as conceptualized now.
Rosalind, I saw you writing something down as well.
Yeah, I don't know. I think when I hear sustainability in blue, you kind of also, it has to be economically sustainable and environmentally sustainable. And I think what we know about deep sea mining right now is that it's probably not economically sustainable or environmentally sustainable. So to have it as a pillar of the blue economy, and when you think of the blue economy, it's something to restore and protect and using the ocean, but also not continuously depleting the ocean. So I don't know, in terms of having deep sea mining, maybe again, when we have all of the research and the evidence to actually say this is sustainable, but I think at the moment we don't really know if it's sustainable. So I wouldn't say that it could be a pillar of the sustainable blue economy.
Thank you very much. Ali, you can unmute. Please keep it very, very brief.
All right. Thank you very much, moderator, for giving me another chance. I just want to have a quick reaction to what just Sunil proposed about the Seabed Authority covering the new High Seas Treaty Secretariat as well. I do not think the Maldives is interested to host, if there is going to be a kind of treaty body or secretariat for high seas treaty. We are lobbying to have it set up in the Maldives. So probably already Jamaica has a seat of the UN, and the ocean governance ambassador is from Fiji, and Maldives is chipping in to see whether we could host, if there's going to be a secretariat for high seas treaty when it comes to enforcement. I just wanted to share that. Thank you very much. The sentiment from Maldives.
Thank you very much, Ali, for that perspective. Unfortunately, we are in the last few minutes of this webinar, and I am not great at goodbyes. Thus, I will invite Auni Benham, who is the honorary president of the IOI, to have the last word and wrap up today's webinar.
Thank you very much. Congratulations on this seminar, and really it opens, our thoughts to what is behind. I was touched by what was said about perhaps the greatest of all United Nations Secretaries General Hammarskjöld, when he said that that the UN is to save us from hell. The only problem is that we are in hell. And the other thing, please, when you talk about BBNJ, you're talking about the column of water. It has nothing to do with the seabed. And what is in the column of water is a treaty. That does not relate to the seabed mining. And then when we talk about UNCLOS, when it was created, and we talk about developing countries, unfortunately, some of the developing countries are the greatest culprits in this debate. So we have to balance that, unfortunately. But it is only like this kind of meeting, this kind of seminars, that we can find a clarity to what we are hoping to achieve. And congratulations to IOI. And thank you very much, the speakers.